our own president, our own Department of Justice, our own elected officials, the MAGA coalition, America First, is now telling you, why would you even care? Why would it even matter if Jeffrey Epstein had our whole government blackmailed? Why would it even matter if Israel and the CIA and all these dudes were trafficking children?
So recently, Ian Carroll released a video explaining his thoughts about the truth regarding the Epstein cover-up, who's involved, what it means for the MAGA coalition that elected Trump largely on the basis that he would be transparent in this arena, and what it means for America moving forward. He's been deep into this story more than almost anyone else out there, so let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
It's official. Epstein never happened. Ignore all the evidence. Ignore your own eyes. The government has investigated itself and determined that it didn't do anything wrong. It's patently absurd, I know. In case you're not personally acquainted with the Epstein case and the massive body of evidence surrounding it, you might be wondering, well, do we really have any proof? I mean, if they were never really able to put anyone in jail and after all these years, Bondi's finding no evidence, then maybe it's like, no. No, nope. No, ma'am. Let's be super clear at the start here. There is so much evidence, and this was such a massive operation. There are loose ends and breadcrumbs literally all around the globe. This is the furthest thing from a closed case imaginable. But for whatever reason, Pam Bondi doesn't want to go ask any of the powerful people that are implicated. And I'll let you figure out for yourself why she might not want to do that. Now, the Trump Department of Justice's official position is that Epstein was just a lone pedophile that was not part of any network and was not blackmailing anyone at all. In fact, Trump can't even believe why anyone would still be talking about a worldwide child trafficking blackmail operation that we are pretty damn sure compromised a significant portion of our political and financial power structure right here in America.
Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, Ian has this totally right. And not only are there mountains of evidence in this case that were previously acknowledged to exist and documented by the FBI when they did a raid on Epstein's property, and that includes the safe that contained digital media, CDs with labels printed on them of prominent people's names. Not only did that exist, but so did the acknowledgement from the administration that these things existed. They made direct references to the client list, and it wasn't just a one-time thing that Pam Bondi said to Fox News that she's now trying to spin and say, hey, I thought they were just talking about the totality of Epstein evidence. It wasn't just her, but she did acknowledge, hey, it's on my desk, the client list, and, I'm reviewing it under the directive of Trump. It was also Trump's lawyer in this administration, Alina Habba, and that video is actually floating around too, where she said, this is going to be shocking, it's going to blow people's minds, we're going to release it. And they already implied future releases when they had that fiasco at the White House back in February, where they gave influencers those binders that said the Epstein files, phase 1, which were full of documents that had already been released. So there is mountains of evidence here. And for them to turn face on this completely is a huge betrayal against the American people who, were led to believe in the run-up and in this campaign that they were going to be transparent about releasing what they had. No. Not only that, but Trump, is just amazed that anyone would want to talk about this 24 hours after the release of this farcical DOJ and FBI release.
I mean, why would you even want to talk about such a crazy idea? Forget the fact that we had campaign promises and that we all want to release the files and that we were promised the files.
Could I just interrupt for 1 second?
I'll just interrupt for 1 second here.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years.
For years.
We have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep?
Really?
That is
creep?
Unbelievable. Do you want to waste the time and do you feel like answering?
I don't mind answering.
I mean, I can't believe you're asking a question on Epstein at a time like this where we're having some of the greatest success and also tragedy.
I don't even believe Trump doesn't believe that the question's being asked. They prepared for this. They knew it would be asked. I think 24 hours about this press conference took place after that release was made. So yeah, given that this represents an entire cover-up, a turn face, a 180 completely from your administration, especially Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino that talked about this and releasing as much as they could before they got in office to turn on this completely, despite everything you said, despite what you told Lex Friedman about this. Yeah, Trump, we are talking about it. Of course we are. Why would we drop it? We know you want to get rid of it for some reason. Doesn't actually look good for you, by the way, to respond this way. I'll just say that too.
With what happened in Texas, it just seems like a desecration, but you go ahead.
Sure. First, to back up.
Wow. Just so much winning. I can't believe you guys even want to talk about Epstein while we're just having so much winning. Like, we literally already bombed Iran, didn't deport anyone, added trillions of dollars to the debt. We're giving it weapons back to Ukraine. And apparently, Bibi rules your country.
Yeah, it's all full of wins. Ian said it, man, like no one but Ian can. That's the truth. And, are the libs owned yet? I was told there'd be lots of owning of libs at this point. I don't know. Maybe this is just more unmanifested genius, 4D chest. And I have heard some absurd explanations for this, like he's not releasing the Epstein files so he can have leverage over the deep state. Just think of how absurd and preposterous that notion is.
So just shut up and win, guys. Just shut up and win. And to add insult to injury, the DOJ released footage from inside the jail, but not of Jeffrey Epstein's cell or not even of his cell wing. They released 10 hours of video that showed absolutely nothing, though they claimed it proved that he committed suicide despite the fact that you can't see Epstein's cell at all. The allegation has always been that he was likely just killed by a cellmate, not some outside assassin. It's not like they were bringing in ninjas through the front door to kill him. We can't even see his cell block. There's plenty of people inside of his cell block, not to mention that there's a minute of missing footage. Not to mention that I have no way to even verify that this tape is real and not AI at this point in 2025. So, yeah, so much winning. We're all really tired of winning.
Yeah, the video was so absurd, and lots of people have done analysis already showing that those doors weren't the cells, as Ian said, and this wasn't really in the same place as Epstein's cell. And actually, after the alleged suicide, they actually released a picture of his cell door, and it's a completely different door. Candace Owens covered that on her podcast, and some others have talked about that, but you can tell from the pictures that it's a completely different door. So not only did they provide absurd footage with that minute skip there, which, it only raises more questions. Why in the world, even if they wanted to sell this, to the American people with this footage that you're putting out to the masses, why wouldn't they get it straight by not having that segment with the jump minute? But it doesn't even seem to be relevant footage in the first place. That's for sure. This is not going to convince anyone that was skeptical about this. We might be, pleased, or at least have our fears subside about this if we got footage from within the cell, which Kash Patel did kind of semi-acknowledge on the Joe Rogan show, basically. He said, we do have footage, and they even had a discussion about, Joe Rogan said, I thought the cameras malfunctioned, and he said, no, we have it, we're going to release it. Well, maybe they meant this absurd footage, but yeah, this is just a total insane story, and they're dancing around this in ways that it's so absurd. This is gaslighting to the maximum degree.
But anyways, the official stance of the government now is that Epstein had no client list and died by suicide, and they're apparently closing the case, which is some of the strongest evidence I've seen so far, actually, that Epstein did in fact have an extensive client list of very powerful people and that he did not kill himself. And now I can only assume, as can we all, that that client list is the people that are covering this all up. Really, this is worse than the Warren Commission. And the lie that they would have you believe here is every bit as dumb as the magic bullet theory.
Yeah, I mean, at least the Warren Commission, I guess, had evidence that they presented and documented and actually analyzed something. In this case, it's the government saying that, essentially there weren't any clients, that this was all just an independent operation. And, for some reason, Ghislaine Maxwell is rotting in prison for no reason. I'd love to see the jury discussions in that case, by the way, to see what they considered. Because you're really saying that she was convicted for sex trafficking to no one, essentially. That's what they're saying. They're also maintaining the lie that, he killed himself when there was really, no evidence of this sex trafficking ring. And I believe it was 4 days or so before a bail hearing. And yeah, they say he was there because he was on suicide watch and he tried it again. But, he had ample opportunity to commit suicide at many, many, many previous times. So, I don't know. This whole thing, it screams cover-up. And, you apply the Occam's razor to this, questions still remain. Not only regarding his death, which I actually don't even think is the most important thing, but also how he accumulated so much wealth and if he was connected to intelligence. And it looks like that's what he's going to talk about now.
But of course, we know that the official story is an abject lie. Alex Acosta was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida back in 2005 through 2009, all throughout Epstein's first arrest, trial, and conviction. And when pressed about the absolutely insane sweetheart house arrest sentence that he gave to Epstein, he said that, quote, Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Whoever told him that was an extremely powerful person and clearly had an interest in Epstein not attracting attention and staying free to do business.
He also said that this is Acosta's words, he said, I was told Epstein was above my pay grade. And this is part of the documented record. The reporter that talked to this press conference with Trump and Bondi the other day, they presented it as if Acosta had allegedly said this. And by the way, I'm glad they asked the question, but there was no alleged about it. Acosta did say that. He claimed that. It's part of the official record.
Clearly, an arm of the intelligence that Epstein belongs to is in the American government, probably some black budget arm of the CIA or something like that. Hence, how someone in our own government could tell Acosta to back off. That is, unless Alex was taking orders from Israelis for some reason, because Israel is the other country clearly involved in this operation. This operation is the quintessential example of the deep, dark depths of the deep state. The merger of covert intelligence networks, organized crime, and the dirty bankers and businessmen that they work with. And it's been around in this form since intelligence agencies have existed. The deep state, honestly, is a lot like Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book of Contacts. It's not just one company or one government. There's no address where they have their HQ. The deep state is a network of relationships. It's the natural corruption that oozes out the other end of a society as complex and sick as ours is right now. The deep state includes people from all parts of the power structures of today's world. Bankers and blackmailers, politicians and celebrities, spies and criminals. They all got where they got by exchanging influence and power and money. Giving out, calling in favors. There's no single organization. There's no name. There's no address. This thing doesn't just work like the rest of the world around it. Think about how much funding the intelligence agencies in the U.S. receive. We don't really even know how many hundreds of billions of dollars flow through public and also secret programs.
Yeah, we don't even know the CIA's exact budget. I don't think that's public information, by the way. So, yeah, he's right about that.
All designed to deceive, to spy on, to control, to subvert. When we're talking about a network like the one that Epstein worked for, you need to think a little differently about what you're seeing. Because what you're seeing is a multi-billion-dollar covert operation created by the most sophisticated spy agencies and criminal masterminds in the world. And they created it specifically to be deniable. The whole point of intel agency organizations and organized criminal enterprises is to be able to get away with something that you're not supposed to be doing. And the way you do that when you're trying to employ hundreds, even thousands of people in your criminal network is you create plausible deniability. You compartmentalize the organization so no one really knows what all the rest of the organization is doing. Most people don't know anything except their own job.
Yeah, the traditional viewpoint, and this is a very blue-pilled or, standard orthodox view toward it, is that the intelligence community exists to protect us from foreign dangers, from foreign threats that would like to undermine us, undermine our country, undermine our government, our way of life, etc. But if you look at the past of particularly the CIA or the NSA, it's just to spy on Americans, to engage in bulk data collection without a warrant, contrary to the Fourth Amendment. When it comes to the CIA, it's to run psychological operations on Americans, like in the case of MK Ultra or Operation Mockingbird. I'm not making this up. Google that. or to enact regime change operations and drum up war propaganda, just like they did against Iran in 53, Guatemala in 54, the Bay of Pigs fiasco in the 60s, the Chilean overthrow, the overthrow of the Yanukovych government in Ukraine in 2014. The list goes on and on and on. And USAID is tied into it too, providing a financial arm for the CIA to do this. But Ian's right, it really is about relationships, the amount of influence and power that changes hands, and it's all based on the good old boys network of the deep state.
Everyone is either bonded in loyalty by most often blood or race, maybe religion, or some form of shared blackmail or threat or fear. A lot of people don't realize that almost all the biggest corporations and executives seem to be in on the bigger picture here to a certain extent. Like, firstly, Peter Thiel, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos. They all have direct business relationships with the U.S. intelligence agencies and actively work with the CIA, NSA, and all the rest of them. Bankers like Jamie Dimon launder everyone's money around and make sure things are going according to whatever the banker's plans are. Larry Fink, I just did a whole video on him and BlackRock that you can watch. I'll link it down below. And Larry's not on here to imply that he was directly connected to Epstein, but rather to remind us all that these people swim very much in the same circles. Larry Fink is working very closely with a lot of these corporate executives and bankers and philanthropists that were also engaging in Epstein's corner of their neighborhood. The intel agencies have been fostering relationships with the biggest corporations since they were founded by corporate lawyers.
That's right, and that's why I always scoff at the notion, oh, America's the perfect example of a free market. No. America's government is intricately tied into the biggest firms in the world in America, including big tech, big pharma, big energy, big banks. So, the real constituencies of a lot of the politicians, including the elected politicians, by the way, that pretend they're representing you, actually look at, JP Morgan and Raytheon and Pfizer as their clients more than they do look at you as their clients.
In many ways, the intel agencies have actually worked for the corporations ever since World War II. And so why wouldn't the top executives and all the biggest corporations also cooperate with the agency? And most people never learn how these things work in school. So, little refresher. Intelligence networks are generally built by agents out of assets. And what I mean by that is that CIA agents are officially hired and trained by the CIA. The process is extensive, and they are federal agents. And a lot of the work they do in the field is actually recruiting assets. Assets are just people out in the world, or the battlefield, or wherever you're operating that can help you achieve your objective. So, if you're trying to infiltrate a terrorist organization, you're trying to make friends with someone inside and maybe convince them to turn and give you information and work for you. In a more domestic sense of the term, an asset might be the founder of a prominent tech company with big aspirations who likes them young, and you might ask him to start a charitable foundation that you could launder a bunch of money through on the side. Or maybe you're just Zuckerberg being asked by the CIA to give them access to your data. The moment he complies, he's an asset of whoever recruited him to do whatever work they asked him to do.
Yeah, that's right. Some people call these governmentalities. It's when the state uses coercion to get big companies, or big tech in this case, to do what they want, to do their bidding, provide data without the authority to do it constitutionally. And the way they get around it is saying, hey, this is just a private company. They can do what they want. We heard that propaganda all throughout the COVID regime and the lockdown regime is like, yeah, a private company can just do what they want. But then we learned from, the Twitter files and other revelations that every three-letter agency under the sun was using whatever mechanisms they had at their disposal to essentially force these companies to comply, or else they were going to levy restrictions, regulations that would only target them, etc. We know this from the Twitter files, and it should have gotten more press at the time.
And if you want to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein story, there are a number of people that appear to be assets, not agents. In fact, these deeper, higher-level networks tend to be composed of mostly all assets instead of agents. So that way, there's basically no agency fingerprints on the thing at all. Remember, plausible deniability. If Sam Bankman-Fried messes up and gets too greedy and sloppy with whatever the hell he was up to behind the scenes, no intel agents here. It's just some wacky tech bro being a dumbass.
Yeah, just deny everything, have no acknowledgement that you ever had any assets whatsoever. That is, the scheme that they play. And that's, I think, emerging in the Epstein case to some degree for sure right now.
The clearest example of an agent in the Epstein network is Ehud Barak, card-carrying former president of Israel, former head of Israeli military intelligence, one of the most decorated members of the Israeli military ever in its history. He's an agent. Even after he retired from officially working for Israeli intel services, he clearly will always work for them, and he clearly still does.
He also was one of Epstein's best friends. He stayed with him and lived with him on occasion, and we have documented records, that he visited Epstein up to 30 times. And again, he was the former prime minister of Israel, and he was also the former chief of Mossad. That's Israel's version of the CIA, essentially. It's their top intelligence services. So not only that, Epstein also has connections to Israel in the form of Robert Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a Mossad agent that's well known and documented as well, and he received enormous sums of wealth from Les Wexner, who owns the parent company of Abercrombie & Fitch and Victoria's Secret. He also has very close ties to the Israeli government. So it's not just like some zany conspiracy theory when you hear people talk about Epstein's connections to Israel. He had several very ironclad connections to Israel, and Ehud Barak was probably the strongest connection.
Then you have Ghislaine Maxwell. Not exactly an agent as far as we know, just the daughter of one of the most prolific Israeli spies in history, Robert Maxwell.
Yeah.
Here he is introducing Ghislaine to Queen Elizabeth II. I think Ghislaine has probably received some official espionage training and maybe a card-carrying member of Israeli intelligence, but if she is, that's hidden deep, deep in secrecy. So either way, she was an integral part of the network and is probably wondering why exactly she's locked up right now if Jeffrey Epstein didn't do anything and didn't have any help. But anyways, Leslie Wexner was the bankroll for much of the operation, as well as providing a convenient cover for Jeffrey Epstein, posing as a recruiter for Victoria's Secret. It's worth noting, he is still free, total billionaire, living in Ohio. No one's asked him any questions. Leslie Wexner is clearly aligned with Israel in everything he does. He is one of the world's richest and most dedicated Zionist philanthropists. The Wexner Heritage Foundation is massive. Bro has dedicated his entire life to Israel and Zionism, despite being from America and American.
Yeah, and the way that Epstein accumulated much of his wealth, but not all of it, we can't explain all of it. It's inexplicable to such an extent that it's crazy. But Les Wexner gave him several hundreds of millions of dollars, apparently, just because he helped him out with his taxes, and he was incredibly good at it. It just seems like it doesn't withstand the smallest modicum of scrutiny at all. But it's totally in line with Epstein's other past, or other avenues of his past. He became a math teacher without the credentials to be a math teacher. He became the partner of a hedge fund without really the credentials to be a partner of a hedge fund. And, the craziness goes on, as Ian's mentioning here.
And he also bankrolled 2 separate sex trafficking rings, one via Jeffrey Epstein inside Victoria's Secret, and the other Mike Jeffries, CEO of Abercrombie & Fitch, whose operation got rolled up way more clean. But honestly, we don't really have any reason to believe we ever saw even a fraction of the extent of the Abercrombie boys trafficking network, so, case closed for now, I guess. But anyways, Epstein's network played to his preferences, which was young girls. And the critical feature that made it work was women working in it. Ghislaine Maxwell and her second-in-command, Sarah Kellen, as well as others like Leslie Groff, were likely first abused and groomed and then became the recruiters of young girls for Jeffrey and his clients or targets or friends or whatever you want to call them. Sarah Kellen knew all about the operation. She was integral to it, scheduling it all, managing who was where and when, appointments, massages, all the rest of it. Sarah was complicit, and she was never charged with anything, never even questioned under oath as far as I'm aware. She spent the last decade or so hiding in her $5.2 million New York penthouse with her NASCAR husband, except he is finally divorcing her and getting as far away from this story as possible. Good move, bro.
That is a good move, but yeah, there's so many people closely associated with Epstein and his dealings that we're just supposed to completely forget about. Victims be damned. Who cares about them? They'll never get justice. This according to the DOJ and FBI, because, there's no evidence that anyone else was involved, despite all the documented evidence to the contrary, including what they've already talked about. Again, we're weeks removed from Bondi also talking about thousands of hours of Epstein molesting kids. That's how she put it in that interview. And then yesterday she comes around and says it was child porn. It wasn't video of Epstein molesting children. Well, that's another contradiction that they can't explain. You can't just explain away all this. They're not even on the same page with each other or themselves in this cover-up and how they're trying to sell it to the American people.
If our government wanted to do anything about this case, they would obviously just investigate Sarah. Just ask her some questions. Figuring out who Epstein's targets were is a little more tricky because although the government confiscated boxes of tapes, DVDs, CDs, all from Epstein's properties, lots of files, lots of evidence, we never saw much of any of that evidence that they actually gathered. But going off of what's in the public domain from over the years, we've got a pretty damn good idea of a bunch of them. And most of them, by all indications, were willing participants. It's not like most of these dudes got tricked in the basic sense of the word. They wanted what Epstein was selling. Whether or not they realized they were going to be filmed while doing it and become enmeshed in this network, that's up for debate. But what starts as a little bit of blackmail can quickly become a long and prosperous, albeit demonic and perverted relationship.
There can, and that's how a lot of people believe that Epstein eventually accumulated so much wealth to the extent that he was a multi-billionaire, is that he would extract money payments because of this blackmail that existed. He would dangle this in front of people that he had information on, video, audio, whatever, and extract these payments, and that's plausible too. But nothing makes sense about his origins, if you ask me, if not for involvement in an intelligence service, likely Mossad. If you apply an Occam's razor in this situation, this story, I've said it before, the most plausible and logical scenario is that he was working for Mossad. It just is. And there's not much more evidence to the contrary regarding an intelligence service of some kind.
But anyways, Bill was getting photographed like this in the airport. And at first, maybe it's not that weird, but then you think about it. President of the United States traveling with a dude that we know was trafficking underage girls. One of those girls is giving Bill a massage. The president of the United States, married man, he just goes to the airport with his buddy Jeffrey, and some random 17-year-old that has no relation to Jeffrey is just there to give massages. Is that a situation that checks out? Like, is there any way to explain that away? Like he just didn't know and wasn't getting other services in.
Oh, I had no idea about that. I was just looking this way and she appeared from behind me. Sorry, that's my best impression. I can't really do it, but no, there's not, to answer his question, a very good, reasonable explanation for this.
Private settings. How are they getting people to go on the internet and pretend like we don't care that our nation is run by pedophiles and that apparently that runs so high up that our own president, our own Department of Justice, our own elected officials, the MAGA coalition, America First, is now telling you, why would you even care? Why would it even matter if Jeffrey Epstein had our whole government blackmailed? Why would it even matter if Israel and the CIA and all these dudes were trafficking children? American children, no less. Little girls off the streets in Palm Beach, Florida. As well as little girls from all around the world. Not to mention, a lot of them were into little boys. That's no big deal, apparently. It's not America First to even talk about it. Just shut up and vote for Trump.
Yeah, man, Ian said it. Great video, great analysis. He's really dove into this case, again, in ways that very few other people have. The resource he constantly cites, and I back it 100% too, and I cite it in some of my videos, is Whitney Webb's amazing book called One Nation Under Blackmail. I think it exists in 2 different volumes and a single combined volume, I believe. But that's a fantastic resource that delves into all of the details regarding this, with citations, with supporting evidence. And that really should be mandatory reading if you want to learn more about the Epstein saga and Epstein's background, because there is just too much in there that can barely be believed if we're to just think that he had no connections to an intelligence service. But that's where we are. The old guard proves to be the same as the new guard proves to be the same as the old guard. And why should we even talk about it, as Ian's saying? And it's just such a stunning reversal, because many dissidents favored Trump and supported him during campaign season because they had hoped that he would bring more transparency to this case. And, they were led to believe that, not because of just like some whimsical, thought in their head, but because people surrounding Trump, very close to Trump, said the same things about what they would do once Trump got into power. He had said to Lex Friedman that he'd take a deep look at it and, probably provide it to the American people when he was interviewed by Lex. Kash Patel talked about, releasing this, that the information was under the direct control of the FBI. He said that directly on a podcast, and that he would do whatever is possible to release it. Dan Bongino, similar tune there. Pam Bondi, maybe the most responsible of anyone for shoving this under a rug and sweeping it away and pretending like this is totally irrelevant now, after really making a big scene of this, a PR stunt in the form of that February conservative influencer campaign where she distributed the binders, had them go on their way. That was the end of the conversation. And there we were to see the contents of the binders online and realize that this whole thing was a sham. And that's really when I knew it was. I actually didn't think they would be this brazen about releasing a memo that denied all the most, pressing things that people have been talking about regarding this case. I thought they would just be silent and let this thing wither away. But this memo was such a stunning reversal in so many ways, not only in regard to the client list, but that he killed himself when Kash Patel himself had raised questions about that prior to assuming the directorship of the FBI, etc. But that's where we're at, and we probably will never get answers from a government. And it's not because we don't want them or that they don't exist somewhere. It's because they're protecting very powerful people, and that should be clear. That fact, above all in this case, should be clear more than any other fact. And this is not a partisan thing. This is a bipartisan affair. This is bipartisan evil, regardless if you're left or right, Democrat or Republican, conservative, liberal, progressive, right-leaning, whatever you want to call it. It's the fault of the political system that protects itself regardless of what party you happen to be part of. It's why you see Trump officials adopt the exact same standpoints in the Epstein case, just as they mostly have in terms of Ukraine and the wars and spending. They didn't exactly entertain the notion that they're ever going to cut government, despite campaigning on that as well in the form of Doge. So that's where we're at. Ian did a great video here. He's a great content producer, and if you check out the original video, he even goes more into depth about some of Epstein's other relationships, and I really recommend that. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to Ian too. He's freaking awesome. Love that guy. He is fantastic on these things. And please consider becoming a YouTube member by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you'll support me financially, which I really appreciate. It helps the channel. And by doing that, you gain access to all my videos before they're released on YouTube to the general public. So until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.